Hello everyone, in this short video we're going to look at building scatter plots in Excel. So a scatter plot is just a way to visually show the relationship between two different variables. We're going to start off just walking you through a really simple example of a scatter plot that I've already built. Then we're going to create our own scatter plot in the other data set, the car sales data set, and we're going to build that scatter plot, then save it as a PDF, and you'll upload that to the course website. So again, a scatter plot is just a way to show visually the relationship between two variables. And in this really simple example, we have a list of two variables here. So distance from home in kilometers, and then the time it took to walk there in minutes. So this first observation, 6 kilometers away, took 31 minutes to walk. 4 kilometers away, took 19 minutes to walk. 2.5 kilometers away, took 11 minutes to walk, and so on. Then we can plot those numbers on this chart here. Across the bottom we have the distance in kilometers, and across the vertical axis we have the time in minutes. So each one of these dots represents one of these observations. So if we look at this first one here, distance from home is 6 kilometers. So we look at the 6 kilometer mark on the distance axis, and then where we would put that dot is where it crosses the 31 minute mark. So we have 31 minutes. If we go across, there's the dot, and 6 kilometers. If we go down, there's the dot. So each dot again represents one of these observations. This is a really simple scatter plot with only a few observations, but you can see a really obvious trend here. The closer to home, the shorter it takes to walk there in minutes. The farther away from home in kilometers, the longer it takes to walk. And the dots follow a pretty obvious pattern, increasing to the right. So going up and to the right. I've also added this line in here. So this line is the best fit line, or a trend line that is as close as possible to all of these dots. Visually, this is just a line that represents the shortest path, but really what that is a representation of linear regression. So we're going to talk about linear regression in a future lab, but for now, just recognize that this line represents these dots. So in theory, if you continued this line way out all the way up, as you got to 7 kilometers, 8 kilometers, 9 kilometers, 10 kilometers, you could see where that dot would hit the line, and you could get an idea of the time in minutes. So now that we've gone over this really simple time and distance scatter plot, we're going to move over to the car sales modified tab here. So in this example, we have a lot of observations, and we also have a lot more variables here. Just like always, a good first step is to familiarize yourself with the variables. So if we go across here, column A is manufacturer, so that's the company that made the car. So Acura, Audi, BMW, Buick, Cadillac, and so on. Column B is the model of the car. So here we have an Acura Integra, Acura TL, Audi A6, and so on. The price, and this is price in thousands, and this is an older data set. You probably couldn't get an Audi A4 for $23,000 now, but this is price in thousands. The next one is engine size, so that's in displacement, in liters. The larger the engine, the bigger the size. So a 1.8 liter engine is quite small, but they go up to a big 8 liter Dodge Viper performance car. Horsepower is next. So horsepower is just a measurement of how much power the engine puts out. Wheelbase is the distance from the center of the front wheel to the center of the back wheel. So it's not overall length, but it's a measurement of how large the car is, basically. Width, how wide the car is. Length, how long the car is from front bumper to back bumper. Curb weight, I believe that is in tons, which just shows how heavy the car is. So smaller car, a lighter car is usually a little bit smaller, and larger cars, let's see here, Cadillac Escalade, very large car compared to an Acura Integra, which is a smaller vehicle. Fuel capacity, this might be in gallons, but it is the size of the fuel tank. And then finally, MPG is miles per gallon, which is a measurement of how the fuel economy of the car. So we're going to look at all of these, and we're going to try to identify which one is the best predictor of price. So knowing what we know about all of these variables that we just covered, we're going to create a scatter plot to try to get a good visual representation of the relationship between these other variables and price. I'm going to start with one that is not a good predictor. So let's say the width of the vehicle. There isn't a lot of variation in width of vehicles. If you think about the width of cars, almost all cars are able to fit two people in them, two people in the front seat, so passenger and driver. So the width of the car really doesn't change whether it's an expensive car or an economy car. So this first example, I'm going to show one that there isn't a strong relationship between the two variables. So I don't think, my hypothesis is that there's not a strong relationship between width and price. To do that, I'm just going to click on the letter G, and then I'm going to hold down the Control key on my keyboard and click on column C. So now I have both price and width highlighted. Then to create my graph, if you go to Insert, and then under Charts, there's one here that just has a bunch of dots on it that says Insert Scatter XY. So I'll click that, and I'll just click on the first scatter. And here it shows really there is no relationship. So remember back to this one where there's an obvious kind of pretty tightly, the dots are pretty tightly clustered around that line, where here they're just kind of all over the place. So there's not a lot of variation in width, and there's not a lot of, it's not a good predictor of price. So we've seen one here that is not a good example. I'm just going to delete that. So I'm going to highlight it, and then I'm going to press the delete key on my keyboard. Next, we're going to try one that is a good predictor. So if we look at horsepower, my hypothesis is that economy cars or cars that are not as expensive, they don't need to have giant powerful engines, just enough to get you to your location and back. Cars that are really expensive, Chevrolet Corvette is an expensive car and is very powerful. Other large expensive vehicles, we can go down the list here. I think I saw a Dodge Viper. There we go, Dodge Viper, 450 horsepower, almost $70,000. But again, this is an old data set. They're much more expensive than that right now. But I think there's a relationship between horsepower and price. So I'm going to click on column E, and then I'm going to hold down the Control button and click on column C, and we're going to create another scatter plot by going to Insert and then Scatter. We'll click on the first one, and now we have one that you can see a pretty obvious line right here. It's not as tightly clustered as the simple one that we looked at earlier, but this one you can see a relationship that as horsepower increases, price increases as well. Now that we have a scatter plot that makes sense, or that shows this relationship, we're going to modify it just a little bit to make it a little bit more readable. Our title doesn't really make a lot of sense, and we don't have any axis titles, and we don't have our fit line there. So the first thing that I'm going to do is, actually, you know what, I'm going to copy this and put it on a new sheet. So we have our scatter plot on a new sheet. We don't have the information behind it, right? We don't have all of this extra, this table behind it. So I'm going to rename this sheet to scatter plot. Then we'll modify this this image just a little bit. I'm going to double click on the title and change it to horsepower versus price. Then I'm going to add a chart element. I'm going to add both a primary horizontal and a primary vertical axis. Down here, we're going to say price in thousands of dollars. And here, we're just going to say horsepower. Finally, we're going to add that fit line. So I'll go back up to add chart element and trend line linear. So now we have that line that shows the relationship between these two variables. Finally, I'm just going to change the color of this line. So if you click on that line, I'm going to change the color to red. I can close this, and now we have our graph, our scatter plot that shows the relationship between horsepower and price from our car sales data. The last thing that we're going to do is we're going to save this graph and just this graph as a PDF. It's going to be the PDF that you upload to the course website. So you're not going to upload this, this Excel file, you're going to upload the PDF. So to do that, I'll go File, Save as PDF. I have my scatter plot sheet. And down here, conversion options, fit to paper width. Otherwise, it's not going to save properly. So make sure you have just the sheet and the scatter plot sheet, fit to paper width, and then convert to PDF. It's going to ask me to save it first. Yes, I'll save it. And there we go. So now I have my PDF of horsepower versus price. So upload this to the course website, and if you have any questions, please use the discussion board on the course website to ask those questions.